Hello there everyone. So I'm preparing a new chapter in the Archetype series at the moment, and I thought that it wouldn't hurt to create a video explaining another aspect of Jung's ideas that would help us to flesh out his model of the psyche a bit more for us. And so today I want to talk about a very elementary concept within Jungian psychology called the persona. The origin of the word persona derives from Latin, which associates to a face or a mask. And it's fitting because the psychic mechanism that it pertains to does operate in a very similar way to a mask. And all of this reminds me of what we've been saying about the schizoid types recently and how they will act very uninterested and emotionless towards people as a defense mechanism, and that prevents access to their inner life. Now, we might not be that extreme, but that doesn't mean that we don't also modulate our nature to meet with differing circumstances. And if we're being honest, we don't behave the same way equally to everyone we meet. And all of this indicates that we have something adaptive about our nature that works very much like a set of masks that we wear in different situations. So we possess this adaptive means that we employ to interface with the outside world, and that interface is what Jung termed the persona. When we hold certain ideas in the abstract, it's very easy to think of them like static constructs, but the persona is not a static construct. It's highly flexible, and its structure can be informed from multiple sources. So let's speak to this and say something about how the persona is created. The persona is formed out of a two-way conversation between the expectations of a society and the desires of the individual. Specifically, the tailored ways that the outside world places on them to conform, and how the individual wishes to be seen by others. For this reason, personas can be very culture-specific, depending on the unique demands and allowances that a culture encourages in its members. For instance, Japanese society places unique demands upon its members compared to America. And we see this very notably when people travel abroad and they get what's called a culture shock. What this means, figuratively, is that their learned behaviour that they have derived from home doesn't mesh well into the learned behaviours of the new societal fabric. And another way of saying it would be to say that their societal masks don't work. Keeping with this Japanese-America example for a bit, we could demonstrate this in another way. Let's say that there is a Japanese family that has a daughter. They raise her in Japan. She absorbs the societal demands and acquires her societal mask up until the age of adolescence, where she takes part in a foreign exchange program and takes her university studies to the United States. She's already studied the English language in Japan, so that isn't really a problem. She travels to America, studies there, watches American television, acquires American friends, and let's say that our Japanese girl likes her time in America so much that she decides to stay on for another 2 years after her graduation, and she travels around the country before returning back home. Upon returning to Japan, she goes back to meet her parents, and they are shocked at what they find. She has a new dress style, new habits, new mannerisms, and even though she can still speak Japanese perfectly, a slight twang of an accent can be heard emanating through that language, to which her parents look at each other in dismay and say, "Oh no, our daughter has become Americanized." This is what happens when people's personas shift in conformity with new learned behaviours and societal pressures that are subliminally conditioned in them over time. This also translates across generations as well. Subsequent generations acquire their own unique responses to life and alter the societal fabric, which in turn alters the persona masks that people most generally conform to. we should not take this organising influence from outside to mean something that is value negative, only that it is an expression of the major organising elements that every society possesses as part of their unique societal fabric that is woven throughout history and with each passing generation. So there we can see how society shapes the way that we appear to others. And even if you think that you are a very rebellious and independently minded person, that would actually be part of your persona mask as well, by the way, you are always conjoined to a certain set of learned behaviours and responses that you have picked up throughout your life. So the external world produces pressures that alters our responses to it. And it's at this meeting point between the external influence of society and the mutability of human behaviour where the persona is formed. The masks that we wear are indicative of the highly adaptive and sensitive responses that are met when coming into contact with new external influences. And the masks are moulded from the society as much as they are from individual responses. So society is instrumental in shaping the characteristics that wed people into a shared ecosystem of learned behaviours. However, there is another source of influence, because not only is the persona shaped by external forces, it's also informed by the individual's desires in how they would like to see themselves and how they would like to be perceived by other people. The human psychological makeup is vastly sophisticated, and it's very difficult for any one person to make sense of it all themselves, especially when trying to reconcile with all of the signals informing them from the outside as well. Our inner landscape is comprised of many elements that are easier to process than others. For example, psychic information that awards us with a sense of self-confidence, perhaps even grandiosity, is not going to be treated in the same way as a reoccurring insecurity that plagues us. Therefore, personal information is not treated equally. We all organise it differently depending on what information complements the image that we want to have of ourselves and what information contradicts that self-image. This latter form of contradictory information is usually regulated by some mechanism of repression such as projection or denial, and instead of becoming a part of the persona mask, becomes embroidered in that part of our psychological anatomy that we call the shadow. So the persona is informed from the aspects of our personal psychology that we feel is complementary to the way that we want to be perceived. We all cherry-pick parts of our psychological anatomy and mould them into the masks that we wear. These qualities then become exaggerated and conceal the real underlying dynamism at work beneath the surface. The persona can be affected by the ways that we are perceived by other people. We intuitively understand that if we change our appearance, then the response from others also changes. This accounts for why so many people take an interest in their own self-appearance, because they exist in a social space where the masks that they wear influence the way that others perceive them, and this ties directly into the ideal image that they have of themselves. We may see other people online dress or behave in a certain idiosyncratic way, and so we take the effort to inculcate that within our own lives so that we can steal those elements that are attracting us and, of course, the responses that this behaviour elicits from other people. It may be a certain way of carrying oneself that projects confidence. Many people have reported boosts in their confidence levels after watching action movies at the cinema, for example. So the personas that other people present to the world can affect the way that we present ourselves. This shows up a lot in how people try to emulate the mannerisms of famous public figures, and also in popular music subcultures where there is a common dress code. We notice this especially around the ages of adolescence, where people are trying on different masks because the more genuine parts of their psyche have not matured yet. And so they compensate for this by trying on all of these different uniforms that have become integrated into their persona ideal. This uniforming through aesthetics becomes an integral part of human social signaling, not unlike how certain animals possess markings and display responses to communicate to other animals as to what they're about. If you walk into a biker bar with a leather jacket and black boots, you are signaling something to the people in that bar. You are signaling an affirmation to others through shared group aesthetics. You're effectively stating, I'm normal, within the ranges of what that group deems as normal. And so the persona signals to their minds that nothing is out of the ordinary. Now, if someone else walked into that same biker bar in a long red dress and a ruby tiara, that would also signal something. For one, it could be taken as a mark of rebellion, and that might also convey that this individual considers themselves a bigger rebel than the bikers actually are, and that act of striding into a uniform area with an inappropriate mask is a playful act of provocation against the masks of others. If we think of another hypothetical example in the form of a soldier, for instance, a person might want to take up that career path for all kinds of personal reasons. However, once that individual has graduated in their training and has donned the uniform a few times, they might experience themselves integrating that new image of themselves into their personality structure. And so they don't only play the role of a soldier in the outside world, they see themselves personified as a soldier, and that restructures their persona model. It alters the way that they relate to themselves, and it alters the way that they relate to the world. The persona is the mask that keeps on moving. Alright then, now let's round off the final part of this video by talking about the persona in terms of our own personal development. We've previously said that the persona is the means of interface between our psyche and the outside world. Therefore, the persona exists between our psychological life and the life of society. We've also stated how the nature of our persona is formed out of a conversation between the parts of our psyche that complement our ideal self-image and the unique demands that human societies place upon their citizens, giving the masks of mankind an enormous range of variance. So, how does this affect the individual? Does the persona help or hinder our psychological development? Well, as you might imagine, it's a bit of both. The first thing to understand is that the persona is not a very good representation of the real psyche, in the same way that a mask is not a good representation of the living organism that exists beneath it. As we've said before, the persona is partly shaped by elements of the individual psychology that complement the way that they would like to see themselves and be seen by other people. So, in that respect, it can never fully contain the real personality because there are always aspects of it that we do not want to admit or reveal to the outside world. As we know from the work of people like Freud and Jung, there are also hidden elements of the individual psychology that are unconscious. So the masks that we wear to interface with society can never fully convey the true breadth and depth of our real mind's ecosystem. And this can create problems for the individual when it comes to our psychological development, because if the persona is formed out of aspects of the personality that the individual finds conducive to their own self-image, then there's a real danger that they will learn to invest heavily into their persona ideal and further dissociate from the parts of their psyche that are calling out for attention and reconciliation. In other words, they mistake the mask for their real identity. But no matter how attractive the mask may be, it's not representative of what we truly are. It is a construct that is formed out of merely a small fragment of what we are. But a convenience stems from the simplicity of the mask, in that it abdicates us from the responsibility of beginning the real adventure of learning about our true psyche that can only come from an honest willingness to engage in the pursuit of self-knowledge and a consistent actualization of our mature potential. This makes the persona a potential bridge into the depths of our inner life, because it is a simplified construct of our psyche, and the simple exercise of coming to know the elements that comprise that mask is a great preparation for when we come to terms with our deeper psychology. But there are many distractions and halfway houses on this path to self-knowledge, and the culture that we exist in is replete with seductive new personas that give us a taste of individuation, removed from the responsibility of commitment. This is made even worse by our proximity to ideologies that capitalize on the psychological underdevelopment of people in a society. Many ideologies, particularly political ideologies, are so attractive because they offer their members a false sense of psychological and spiritual affirmation. They achieve this by offering their members with a false cosmology of how the world actually operates, which, like the persona, is formed out of certain elements of truth, but can never really contain a sophisticated image of the world that rests beneath it. Ideological systems also supply people with a false sense of self, which is naturally united to the world system that they adhere to. People under the grip of an ideological possession are rewarded in the short term by a surge in confidence that stems from the conviction that they have the world figured out and that they finally found their place in the world. This couldn't be further from the truth, because their persona has simply reconfigured to fit the world model that the ideology has supplied. They are no more knowledgeable of themselves than when they first started. Their entire sense of self is derived from a condensation of human beings and the world that is as two-dimensional as the mask itself. Ideologies are themselves like masks because they're extensions of the psychological development and deficiencies of its propagators, and therefore it cannot ever satisfy the unique psychological demands of any individual human life. At best, all they can offer is another halfway house to individuation. At worst, they are the parasites that feed off the eagerness of its members to find direction and become psychologically whole. To those caught up in the ideological cosmology, the whole procession of their life becomes caught up in the enterprises of the ideological adventure, which supplants the real adventure of coming to ever know themselves in their own individual terms. And whatever short-term benefits and insights that they glean from entering into that particular ecosystem of ideas, none of that can compare to the real benefits and insights that lie within an engagement with their own true nature. I believe that it is a part of our birthright to know what we are, and the means that we employ to divert that process will not serve us in the end. Such obfuscations will eventually lead to such crises of identity that typify the phenomenon of the midlife crisis, or potentially a full-blown psychological breakdown, where the things that we have left unaddressed eat their way to the surface of our conscious life and consume the mask that we have hid behind our entire lives. So, if we want to mature psychologically, we have to remain conscientious of the fact that the mask is not the whole psyche, even though it's sometimes tempting to pretend like it is. And this doesn't mean either that if we want to mature, then we have to rid ourselves of the persona somehow, because the persona is one of the essential organs within the organism of our psychology. So the initial task is not about trying to remove ourselves from the mask, so to speak. It's simply being aware that the mask is not the entire personality, and that there's a lot more to our personal psychology than the novelties of the mask can ever convey. So I think I'll leave it at that. This has been my video on the persona. Thank you very much for watching, and as usual, I'll see you again.